What's up, everybody? Welcome back. We're here with a live Q&A. DraftKings MMA DFS picks, lineup advice, UFC 281, Israel Adesanya, Alex Pereira. We got Weili, Zhang, Carla Esparza, 2 title fights, 14 fights on the cards, November 12th, Saturday night card. We're here to give you everything. Best bets, picks, lineup advice, FanDuel, DraftKings, prize picks, whatever. You name it. We're here. Welcome. I'm Brian Jester, co-founder of Occupy Fantasy. I am joined by Jake the Snake, owner of MMADFS.com. Jake, what's happening, man? Busy week.
Yeah, man, 14 fights, always going to be a long week, but I really like this card, man. I think it's going to be a good one.
I do too. And as you and I were discussing yesterday, it's a pretty overwhelming card just from the fact that there are so many fights. There are a lot of tricky spots. The title fights are a little tricky as well. Trying to figure out which fighters we want to go underweight on, fade, play heavily. It's a lot to think about.
Yeah, I think we have a lot more close fights than your typical pay-per-view card. So a lot more coin flips, a lot more live fighters, and that hopefully should mean a lot less dupes.
Let's hope so. Let's hope so. So what we normally do in these videos, normally they're 10, 15, 20 minutes long, and we break down the main events, talk about any newcomers, fighters that have less than 5 fights under their belt in the UFC, what their context of their fights look like, prize picks plays, fights you want to target, some best bets. We'll still do all of that, but there's a little bit longer live show. So if you have questions throughout the show, we'll do our normal thing, but we'll stop and answer any questions we see in the chat. Just throw it in the YouTube chat over there. See Patrick's in there already. What's up, Patrick? If you're stopping by, say what's up. We'd love to hear from you. So until we get questions, let's just jump into it, Jake. 14 fights. Let's start from a high level here. FanDuel, DraftKings. 2 title fights. Every time we do these live shows, it's normally during a pay-per-view, and normally it's 2 5-round fights on the card, so we have a pretty decent data set to work with. Generally, what does it tell us for how we should approach lineups with this type of fight setup? And then how does this slate in particular, does that change anything given the 2 title fights that we have?
Yeah, so I was actually looking at some of the numbers so far. So this is we've had 11 pay-per-view cards this year. 9 of them have had 2 5-round fights, so we got pretty decent data. So just going through the stuff we've got. So on the 9 slates this year, so 18 5-round fights, favorites have gone 13-5, done pretty well. Of the 13 favorites that have won, 10 of those have ended up in the winning DraftKings lineup, so 77%. The 3 that were left out were Shevchenko, who got priced out in a decision win over Santos, Adesanya, who only scored 86, and then decision win over Cannonier, and then Brandon Moreno, who mid-round KO over Kai Kara France, also didn't score enough. And then of the 5 dogs that have won, actually only 3 of them have ended up in the winning DraftKings lineup, so only 60%. The 2 that got left out were Nagano. He had that 5-round decision win over Gon that no one saw coming, scored 93 points, didn't quite get there. And then actually Esparza, a lot of people probably remember the worst fight of all time, and
Love that slate.
her winning the title.
Slate. Fantastic slate. Loved it.
Against Namajunas. Yeah, I bet you did. That was a nice one for you. But Esparza scored 53, so even though she was super cheap, didn't end up in the winning lineup. Worked out pretty well for you on that one. So on the 9 slates this year, we had 5 of them with exactly 1 5-round fighter in the winning lineup, and we had 4 with 2 5-round fighters in the winning lineup. So right there kind of tells you you want min 1 5-round fighter in all of your lineups. The one time we've ever seen, and it wasn't even this year, the one time we've ever seen a slate with multiple 5-round fights where the winning DraftKings lineup didn't have 1 5-round fighter, it was when Charles Oliveira and Juliana Pena both won, and neither one was in the winning lineup, but Juliana Pena was actually in the optimal lineup. She was just like 3% owned, so no one hit it. So, I mean, even in that case, you still want min 1. So pretty easy rule. We generally tell people that 4 of the last 6 slates had exactly 1 5-round fighter in them, and all 4 of those, it was actually 1 favorite. So if you're going to just put 1, I mean, pretty strong indicator that you just want either Adesanya or Weili to be just that 1. And if you play 2, it's either both favorites or a favorite and a dog. We've seen 2 dogs win twice, and neither time did both dogs end up in the winning lineup. And I mean, it makes sense. Like, you look at it, if 1 dog wins, yeah, there's a good chance you're going to need them just because the salary saving. But if 2 wins, it kind of waters it down a little bit. Typically, when the dogs win, they're not putting up these crazy slate-breaking scores, so they're kind of competing against each other at that point. So both times the optimal just had 1 dog when both dogs won. So I wouldn't play any double dog lineups here. I think that's probably it's not going to be super popular, but it's going to be owned higher than the chances of it actually ending up in the winning lineup. So I think it's pretty straightforward, man. Most of your lineups, you just wanted one favorite, and then a decent amount of the lineups, you're going to play either both favorites or a favorite and a dog. And just know that if you play both favorites, you're going to have to get different elsewhere because it's going to be harder to be unique in those lineups.
Yes. Yeah. No. That's a hell of a breakdown, Jake. I think you hit all the key points. And to me, if you're playing that strategy of just one favorite and no fighter from the other 5 round fight, I think the highest likelihood, the model agrees, you agree, is probably just playing Weili and fading the Pereira Adesanya kickboxing match, right? I guess the question is, well, one, do you agree with that? Is that the right way to go, or the most probable way to go? And two, how does the Weili fight fail if she wins, and how does the Adesanya Pereira fight exceed expectations?
So first of all, yeah, absolutely. I think that the optimal strategy on this slate is to just play Weili as the only 5 round fighter. I think that's gonna long term. That's the most EV move right here. In terms of how she fails, she's the second most expensive fighter on the slate. So if she gets taken down in round one and then gets a finish in round two or round three, scores like 100, 103 points or something, yeah, she could get outscored. In your lineups, you might not win at that point because it might not be the optimal, but you're still going to be right up there. So, I mean, it's still a super high floor play. And I mean, there's a really good chance she's in the winner. So you're not killing yourself if you just go all in on Weili here. But I would say that's the one way she fails is priced out or just gets controlled early on. Esparza's a wrestler. She's going to try to take her down. If she does take her down, that's going to lower Weili's ceiling just because it takes away volume, takes away the chances of a first round finish. In terms of Adesanya, I mean, he's always relied on knockdowns to put up big scores. So that's the way he puts up a big score here is a multi-knockdown performance and a well-timed finish. I mean, he could get 2 knockdowns in a 3rd round finish and still potentially not score great if there's not much volume. And we're not expecting a ton of volume. Both guys are dangerous. Adesanya is super elusive. I don't think he's just going to be running into the power of Pereira here. Look back at how he fought Jan Blachowicz, when he was fighting a really powerful opponent, a little more tentative. I mean, I think we could see something like that. I mean, yeah, Izzy's talking about it being a war, but he's not just going to run in on the left hand of, Pereira here. He's going to be smart. He's going to be careful. He's going to be elusive. And we're probably not going to see any takedowns. So it's going to be a low volume kickboxing match where you're going to need multiple knockdowns and a well-timed finish for the winner to score well.
I mean, you've hit it right on the head. That sounds exactly how we expect it to play out. Patrick says, which dog do you like better if you had to choose one of these dogs for your lineup?
Of the 5 round dogs, man, I think it's somewhat close just because I think if Esparza wins, I mean, I would say it's really hard. I know she just got left out and scored like 50 points, but I think if she wins this fight, I think it's really hard for her to get left out because the way she wins is by wrestling. And at her super cheap price tag, we're not going to see a staring contest. Weili's super aggressive. So at her super cheap price tag on DraftKings, I think Esparza is basically a DraftKings specific play. I'll say that because of the control time and ground strikes. She would need a finish probably on FanDuel to really score well. But I think she's going to, pretty much score well when she wins. But she's a little bit less likely to win than Pereira. So, I mean, it's a little tricky because I think if Pereira wins, when they were in the kickboxing fight, Pereira got a round 3 knockout. Yeah, he's only like 7,600, but if it's a low volume fight and he gets a 3rd round knockout, he could very easily still get left out of the winning lineup, even if he does win. So you can't just look at the money line implied chances of winning here. You also have to look at the price and the scoring potential. So I don't know, man. I think it's tricky. I think it's kind of a coin flip. I don't really love either dog. And I think it's close for the reasons I just said.
For sure. All right, I got a couple questions in the chat. Eagles says, great show, boys. We appreciate you tuning in. Thank you. Do you think Blanchfield is going to be the highest DraftKings scorer today? I know the model's a big fan, Jake. Obviously, the biggest favorite on the card. Pretty favorable matchup from a DFS scoring perspective. Do you think she ends up as the highest scorer?
I think she definitely can. I think her and Weili might be competing with each other unless we see someone get a finish in the first 60 seconds, which, that obviously changes things. But yeah, I mean, without a quick win bonus, I would say Weili and Blanchfield on DraftKings, I think are going to be competing for that like 120 point area where they're both have huge ceilings. Blanchfield, obviously, she doesn't even need a finish. She can just control McCann on the ground the whole fight. We've seen it before. I think she has a massive ceiling.
All right, so that's a good transition to our next segment. There are no debuting fighters on this card. So we'll play good fighter, bad matchup, bad matchup. Fighters with 4 or less UFC fights under their belt. Give a little context to their game logs, their fight logs, their UFC stats, and we'll say whether they're good or bad and whether this matchup is good or bad for them in DFS. So we just talked about Blanchfield, Jake. Good fighter, good matchup, right?
Yeah, I mean, great fighter, great matchup.
All right. We'll go from the top down from the highest price DraftKings play. Andre Petroski, just 3 fights.
Yeah, I think the book's still out on him. I'm not ready to call him good yet because I think his striking isn't great and his cardio is still a question, even though he's got a couple third-round finishes in the UFC. I think it's a bad matchup from the perspective that, Turman's the first really high-level grappler he's faced. The last one we thought we were going to really see what Petroski was about, and he gets a submission in like a minute in. And then, since then, Maximov has been cut, so it's hard to even say that was as tough a matchup. That was going to be a tough wrestling matchup. This is going to be a tough grappling matchup. Whereas Turman's a BJJ black belt, trains with Glover Teixeira. I think he's going to be a submission threat off the bottom, which I think is going to make Petroski probably a little more tentative here. So I think that makes it a tougher matchup.
For sure. All right, moving on down. We have Carlos Ulberg, teammate of Izzy, fighting for the title. Ulberg just 3 fights under his belt against Negu Mariano.
Yeah, good striker, but I would say he's still a bad MMA fighter. Bad cardio, no wrestling.
And this is a bad matchup for him. I know you're big on the matchup here for Negu Mariano.
I do think it's a bad matchup because I think that Negu Mariano is going to test the cardio of Ulberg. He's going to push him against the cage. He's going to make him use muscles he's not used to. He's not going to let him just have this pretty kickboxing match. So, yeah, bad matchup.
Cool. All right. Moving on down. One of my favorite fighters on the roster, just based on the scoring potential she has, Gomez Juarez. Is she good? Is she not good? Is this a good matchup?
Man, she's similar to Ulberg in the sense that, one-dimensional striker, absolutely no wrestling. Like, floor is lava on her. She gets armbarred if she goes down to tie her shoe. So it's hard to call her a good fighter. She's a great striker with great upside for DFS, but similar to Ulberg, I would say from an overall MMA perspective, I would still consider her a bad fighter. But yeah, man, she's super fun. Just has dynamite in her hands. I think it's a pretty good matchup. I don't know if Carolina is super prone to getting knocked out. She's only been knocked out once in her career, and it was Jessica Andrade. But she is pretty prone to getting hit, and I don't think she's a great fighter, and she's willing to take part in a brawl. So I think it's a good matchup for Juarez. And Carolina got a sub in her last fight, so I think there's a lot of recency bias thinking she's a grappler all of a sudden. She has like 2 takedowns in 13 UFC fights, so I don't think we need to worry too much about her taking the fight down. It's just if the fight somehow gets to the ground, then she'll look for submissions. But she's not a great wrestler, so I think it's a pretty good matchup for Gomez Juarez.
All right, fair enough. All right, let's move on down. Probably the most important spot on the entire card is Ottman Azaitar, who hasn't fought since 2020. Scored 97 and 111 DraftKings points in his 2 victories. The line has flipped dramatically in his favor. He's going to be one of the most popular fighters on the card. Give me the rundown, Jake.
Yeah, man, what a crazy line flip. I mean, it opened the week at negative 105. It's up to negative 155. It's super rare to see line flips like that. I mean, yeah, he was just a really slight dog early on, but I don't know why they're pricing him that way. This guy, there's so many unknowns around him. He hasn't fought in 2 years. He hasn't been past the first round since like 2017. He literally has like 5.5 minutes of cage time in the last 5 years. So we don't know what his cardio looks like. He hasn't hit the mat yet in the UFC. He's fought 2 super glass-chinned opponents, knocked them both out, but is he actually good at knocking out higher level opponents, or is he just good at finishing lower level opponents? I mean, there's so many unknowns. And his brother Abu, came back from a long layoff, and he gassed out against Marc-Andre Barriault and then just got tormented in the 3rd round with 200 ground strikes or something in that fight. The ref just refused to stop. So, I mean, who's to say that they're not both gassers? So I think that's of some concern. The guy's he's a power puncher. He's really good at knocking people out, and we've seen Frivola get knocked out in 60 seconds or less twice in the UFC. So I think from that perspective, we have to call it a good matchup. But Frivola does have a background in wrestling. If he wants to take this fight to the ground and test Azaitar on the mat, that would be really smart. Whether or not he does that, who knows? Frivola came out, brawling in his last fight after getting knocked out in 7 seconds by McKinney. It was definitely kind of like a, hey, guys, I know I got knocked out in 7 seconds, but watch this. And then he just lands 4 knockdowns against Valdez and just puts on a crazy brawling first round. So I think you have to think it's a good matchup for Zaitar. Whether or not Zaitar is a good fighter is still unknown, but he is good at knocking people out.
Have we seen the results of Frivolo's poll yet? For those who haven't seen, Frivolo posted a poll on his Twitter account asking, should he brawl or should he wrestle? And it's like, Jesus, dude, please wrestle.
I mean, I think he's joking, but can you imagine if
he He's like, well, 55% of my followers said I should brawl. Let's brawl. God.
Yeah, so everyone go vote on Frivola to wrestle, please.
Yeah. All right, let me ask you this. All right, so if you're making one lineup, you're making 20 lineups, you're making 150 lineups. What is your just gut thought on exposure to Zaitar and Frivola in those one lineup, 20 lineups, 150 lineups?
I want more Frivola than a Zaitar in all 3 of those situations. So if I'm making 1, I'm going Frivola. If I'm making 20, I'm going more Frivola than a Zaitar. And if I'm doing the same in 150, I think it's the best leverage spot we've seen in a while. And of course he's going to get knocked out in like 10 seconds now that I say that. Guaranteed. But he opened as a favorite. He scored like 158 points or something in his last fight. He's going against a guy that hasn't fought in 791 days, a guy that's untested, that hasn't been past the first round in 5 years. I mean, Frivola has the wrestling advantage, the experience advantage, the activity advantage. And if you look at the ownership, I mean, where do we have it right now? It's like 15% to like 40%. I mean, a Zaitar is like 3 times his owned. I mean, yeah.
We know how this ends up, though, right, Jake? Like, we know how this ends up.
Yeah.
Like, come on. We know how this ends up.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Frivola is going to out-wrestle him and knock him out in the 3rd round.
Yeah, there we go. That's the spirit. Okay. All right, so we said enough on that fight. Hopefully you guys understand that that's a fight that you want to target. I think that answers Brett's question in the chat. Certainly a fight that you want to target for DFS. I guess it depends on your risk reward, Jake, but it's probably insane to completely fade a Zaitar if you're making 20 or 150 lineups, right? Because you are drawing dead if he wins in the first round.
Yeah, no, I think you can't fully fade him. I think you just need to figure out what your risk tolerance is. I mean, you look at his round 1 chances, the implied odds are like 21%, and he's going to be on double that. So, I mean, you have to be under, but how much under is totally up to your risk tolerance and how many lineups you're doing. I mean, I think kind of going around his round 1 win chances makes the most sense. But if you want to go more game theory and adjust based on that, I totally get it.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think that's a really good call. All right, let's keep moving on with our good fighter, bad fighter. I think we're almost done, actually. I think we are done, right? There's no one else at the bottom. I guess Alex Pereira, right? We talked about him, but like, is he good? Is he bad? Is this a good matchup, bad matchup, despite the history?
It's funny. I feel like all the fighters we're talking about, they're all just one-dimensional strikers with no grappling, and Alex Pereira is just another one of those. Yeah. But at least for him, he's not facing someone that's looking to wrestle. So I mean, yeah, another really good striker with no wrestling, with cardio concerns. But it's a better matchup for him because it's going to be a kickboxing match, and that's what he wants. So obviously, he's facing the best kickboxer in the world. So I can't call it a good matchup, but it's not a terrible matchup. It's sort of a neutral matchup, a good stylistic matchup, but a bad, opponent matchup. And yeah, I mean, he's a good one-dimensional striker. So
cool. All right, let's move on. I see a lot of people here are watching. Welcome. Say what's up in the chat if you're here watching. Say hello. If you like what you've seen so far, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. We do these UFC videos. Normally, they're pre-recorded. When it's a non-pay-per-view event every Friday night for cards with 12 or more fights. We do these live Q&As on pay-per-view Saturdays. So make sure you subscribe. Gets notified when we go live uploading the videos. Give us a thumbs up. Lets us know that we should continue to do this. And again, any questions, throw them in the chat as we hit the final third of the show here. We'll be out here by 1:30 p.m. Eastern. So all right, we talked at length about the Zaitar matchup. Jake, is there another fight on your radar that you think whoever wins has a really good likelihood of ending up in the optimal DraftKings lineup?
Yeah, I like the first fight of the night, the Ulberg-Negumereanu fight. I think that, Ulberg is most live for round 1 KO, and if he doesn't get it, I think Negumereanu is going to take over later in the fight, press him against the cage, land a ton of clinch strikes, make the fight ugly. should score better on DraftKings and FanDuel, but I think if he gets a finish, he's going to be the guy that ends up in the winning lineup on both sides. You can start off your night good, get that dog out of the way, and I think one of these guys is going to end up scoring well. Unless the only way it busts is if Ulberg literally just circles outside of the octagon, jabbing from the outside the whole fight, which is always possible. But as long as we don't see that, I think we're going to see a high score.
For sure. And here's the thing: if you don't have the winning fighter in your lineup, fire up those late slate lineups. We got it in the lineup builder too. So reserve some captain spot lineups on DraftKings and salvage your night. You don't want to lose the fun one fight into the card. So just make sure you got some of those ready for you. So, all right, moving on. You see the Prize Picks promo here on screen. If you haven't signed up for Prize Picks yet, nice little site where you can parlay props together across tons of different sports. They have some really soft UFC lines. Jake points them out on his site, MMADFS.com. He points out some in the Daily Plug, OccupyFantasy.com on Fridays. See the promo code, use code OCCUPY when you deposit. Get a 100% deposit match bonus up to $100. Get some free money to play with. Jake, which line stood out to you the most this week over on Prize Picks?
Yeah, man, there's a few that I really like that I think are pretty close. I've been going back and forth on which is my favorite, but I think based on the lower point total, I really like Jackson over 83.5 points seems low for him. I know that it's not DraftKings scoring rules, so you don't get the control time, but the guy just racks up takedowns, good striker, not the best matchup against Arce. Arce is a solid takedown defense, but still 83.5. I think Jackson's going to win, and I think it's hard for him to score under that. So I really like over on that on Prize Picks.
For sure. Okay. I think we talked about a lot here. Let's get on to some of our favorite bets. So really you want to get Jake's premium content, MMADFS.com, because he puts out bets early in the week. Then because they're all sharp, the lines move almost every time. Any bets that are remaining that he likes that you can still find in Line Shop, he puts in the Daily Plug on Fridays at OccupyFantasy.com. We try to pair together two of the bets for a stream parlay every single week. Jake, no surprise, a lot of the lines have already moved. So I'll give a bet that I like that's still remaining, that's still out there that people can tail. You give your side one that you like. And we talked about it being a bad matchup for Petroski. And Wellington Turman, great submission specialist. You can get him to win by sub plus 500 here. And I think that's the side I'll take in my league of the stream parlay.
I think that makes sense. If he wins, I think that's how he wins. His money line's plus 165, so big gap there. I like that one. I'm going to stick with Negumereanu, round 2 or round 3 KO at plus 700 on FanDuel. Man, I think the way he wins is just Ulberg gasses out and Negumereanu wears him out and finishes him late. So 7-1 seems a bit wide there. And if we pair those together, that'll be plus 4,700. So a nice little 47-1.
All right, we'll take a 47-1. We'll get Lambos that way for sure. There's another big one in the plug as well, so make sure you go check that out. Again, the Daily Plug, OccupyFantasy.com, has low risk and high risk plays for FanDuel and DraftKings, lineup construction tips for specific sites, Prize Picks plays, best bets, everything you need, contest selection tips. Go check it out. Jake's site, MMADFS.com, breaks down every single fight from a betting and DFS perspective, has the archive, which is invaluable on slates like this where we go back and look at previous slates to see what has won. Patrick says, I know Brian is a mass multi-enterer, but Jake, what type of contest do you play? And Jake, I know you play tons of contests as well.
Yeah, no, I normally do 150 and then a 20 max and then some smaller stuff like a 3 max for some smaller fields. So yeah, I play it all, but I mainly focus on 150 as well.
Let me ask you this, because we didn't really talk about it in the 5-round discussion we normally do. For those of you who play cash games, low-risk lineups, 50-50s, double-ups, head-to-heads, generally it's pretty straightforward. And even on some of these 5-rounders, it's pretty straightforward. But Jake, this one is kind of tricky, just for all the reasons we've discussed so far. What do you think is the optimal approach? How many 5-round fighters? How many? And the other thing is, right, like normally we don't have multiple 5-round fighters and a mispriced fighter. We actually did have one. It was actually the last time Adesanya fought. I remember it specifically because it was during round 2 of the MMA Championship qualifier, and we had I'm trying to think who it was that was mispriced, and it was Barberena against Robbie Lawler, and it made a really interesting, if not difficult, decision on how to build a low risk lineup because normally we stack it, but now how many sub 8K fighters do we play? What are your thoughts here for today?
No, I think that's a really good point. it does make it trickier because normally we're stacking one of the two 5-round fights when we have two 5-round fights. We've kind of found that's the best approach is to play 3 of them. But in this case, we don't really need to because we normally do it to save salary, but now we have a Zaitar to save salary. So, I mean, the main thing is you don't want to play 3 underdogs in cash. So Zaitar is no longer an underdog, but he's priced as one. Right. So I would play him, and then I would play the 2 main event favorites. And I don't think you need to stack either of them this time. So it's kind of a unique multi 5-round slate from that perspective. But it's also a little bit, trickier just because you don't have that automatic 3 spots filled. But yeah, no, I think that's what I would do. Both faves, a Zaitar, and then you're going to want to get either Jackson or Blanchfield, one of those 2 in as the safe plays, and then fill it in around there.
I think so. Jayhawk is in the chat, says we also had Dos Anjos in another card mispriced, which thankfully we don't have here today because the double dog mispriced cards, especially 5-rounders, is legitimately one of the worst times you can possibly have in MMA DFS.
Yeah, that never goes well.
All right, guys, 4 minutes left. If you have any rapid fire questions, let's get them in. If not, we'll close out the show. I know you guys got lineups to build. We have lineups to build. We got the NFL show at 2:30. I'll hop back on here with Moose. We'll preview tomorrow's games, take your questions, talk about stack ideas. We are doing NBA videos every single day here on YouTube, so make sure you're subscribed to that. Our NBA analysts are doing a fantastic job. Then our guy Chuck does a live stream in our Discord every single night, 30 minutes before lock. Which reminds me, join our Discord server, occupyfantasy.com/Discord. Links in the description. For UFC, you can come ask us questions, chat with us, chat with other members of the community. Most importantly, sweat and tilt the fights with us tonight. We'll be in there all night, so come check that out. And again, it's an invaluable resource for NBA where you can listen to live analysis before the slate locks. Jayhawk's in there as well, answering questions, so make sure you go check that out. All right, Jake, any final thoughts on this slate? Dude, I'm not done building. It's still tricky for me. I haven't completely decided what I'm going to do. Honestly, I think it's from the scale of straightforwardness to confusion. For 150 max, I'm pretty set on what I'm going to do. But as we get smaller and smaller, I'm really struggling on deciding what I'm going to do, especially in small field lineups.
Yeah, it is a little bit tricky, man. We just have so many plays that are similar. It's hard to really say and take many hard stands and say, I really like this guy or I really don't like this guy because we have so many similar options, Even at the top, once you get past Blanchfield and Jackson and Weili, like Reyes, Petrosky, Gutierrez. I mean, a lot of these guys, Choi, a lot of these guys are sort of similar outlooks where, they kind of need early knockouts, or Petrosky just needs to dominate on the mat, but it makes it a little bit trickier to differentiate. You've got guys coming off long layoffs. I think we have 4 fighters longer than a year layoff, and we have 3 that are like 420 days or longer. Jackson's a long layoff, Zaitar is a long layoff, Reyes is a really long layoff. And then Frankie Edgar, it's been just over a year since he last fought. And he's already announced his retirement, which, that narrative never goes well for people.
Literally never goes well. So.
Right. I think there's a lot to look at. And then we had 2, we had a couple weight misses, with Trezano and Spann. So, there's a lot to consider. And definitely a lot to digest with 28 fighters on the slate. So I think it's a tough one to really wrap your brain around. But, we did our best in the plug to kind of help everyone out.
Yeah. So last week, Jake, you had a ton of exposure to Minner. He ended up being injured. Who's the guy that's going to be secretly injured this week that you have a ton of exposure to?
Man, dude, Dillashaw and Minner, so brutal.
It's rough.
I'm gonna say
for Bolo for sure.
Did I have a ton of exposure to? No, I'm not gonna have a ton of exposure to the injury this time. I'm due to not have it. I'm gonna say Alex Pereira comes in with an injury, and I'm going to have very little exposure. And Izzy knocks him out.
All right. That's a hell of a call. Final question here is from Samuel B. When odds change, does that affect your exposure to fighters? So, Jake, I'll say that when the odds change, it certainly impacts projections. It impacts our model as well. Certainly impacts ownership. And as a result, that's naturally going to impact your decision-making when it comes to your exposures and how you build lineups. So, any expansion on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's certain times where it would be, it would have a bigger effect. Like a line flip is going to have a bigger effect on what happens on a slate. But yeah, I mean, a big line move, I think in general, it's going to, like you said, it's going to have a domino effect where it affects everything. So yeah, I mean, everything affects everything.
Yeah, so monitor it. Normally we see those flips, right, like in the middle of the week, early in the week, and then maybe we'll see some action. But I guess with the sketchy action last week, make sure you monitor those odds in the hour before lock to see if we see any crazy movement. So, all right, that'll do it for the show. We appreciate everyone tuning in as always. For Jay, you can follow him on Twitter at DFS_MMA. Go read his work at MMADFS.com as well as OccupyFantasy.com. You can follow me on Twitter at BrianJesterFF. Again, join our Discord, OccupyFantasy.com/Discord. We'd love to have you in there. Sweat the fights with us tonight. And again, if you're still watching to this point, make sure you are subscribed to the channel if you like the video. That way you get notified when we go live, upload these every single week for UFC. Final question. Juarez or Nego Mariano? I know we made a new rule in Discord today, no 1v1s, but if you had to pick one of those fighters, Jake, for DFS scoring.
Yeah, you didn't make the rule for YouTube. I love both of them. Those are like two of my favorite dogs on this slate. So I mean, that's hard to say which one I prefer, but yeah, I would say put both of them in and take someone else out of your lineup.
There we go. Love that answer. All right, that's the new answer. Anytime I ask 1v1, you say both. All right, Jake, Brian, Occupy Fantasy, MMADFS.com. Thanks everyone for listening, and good luck in tonight's UFC 281.